This podcast contains
Good memes,
bad humor,
bad thumbnails,
no swear,
a little clickbait,
inconsistent uploads,
copyright strikes,
no research,
and permanent ear damage.
and finally, a group of students who have a combined IQ of 10. Is it better?
let's get ready to rumble.
They're
I'm
two
glad
separate
this is how we're
sentences.
starting, by the way.
They are two separate
This
sentences.
says a lot
Ono.
about the education.
Yeah, this says a lot about the education system.
Speaking of the education
or
system,
personal.
That's our topic today.
Yay!
That's such a great segue. Everyone clap for that segue. Are we starting?
This is shipwreck already.
All right, let's start with a few quotes. What a wonderful way to start, okay? The first quote comes from John Dewey. Education is not a preparation for life. Education is life itself. This really tells us how important the education system is. And the second quote I'm sure Timmy would enjoy is by B.F. Skinner from the behavioral
psychologist.
Yep, behavioral psychologist. Education is what survives when what has been learned has been forgotten.
Interesting.
Right. So I'm going to skip Nelson Mandela's quote and go to the opening question.
That is very saucy. All right.
Today's opening question is, what skills should be acquired from school? So school, and when we're talking about school here, we're talking about all the way from primary to secondary school. We're going to disregard the kindergarten stuff. So let's start with Timmy.
Right. So what skills do we learn from school? That's the question.
What skills should be acquired?
Well, obviously we should be acquiring important life skills because they will help us in our careers. They'll definitely, like when we go to school, we're trying to learn things that will help us in the future. But at the same time, my point is that sometimes we're learning stuff that doesn't help our future. I believe that's a pretty good point. Now, I have some anecdotal evidence. For example, in chemistry, there is a lot of information that HL students need to know, but SL students don't need to know. Is this going to be related to their careers? JC, as a Chem SL student, you should be able to talk about why you chose that subject. Is it because you don't believe you'll be doing a very medicine-based career in the future?
I actually didn't put a lot of thought into that. I just literally ticked, I've studied this subject before. Let's just do that then. So that's the thought process. Alex, what about you? Answer the question.
All right, so I feel like social skills is very important. You can learn all you want from school about like language or science or math or whatever. But the problem is, without the proper social skills, when you go into society, you're this piece of waste, like literally. Because if you can't communicate with anyone, no one is able to cooperate with you. If no one is able to cooperate with you, no one is able to do anything productive with you. If no one is able to do anything productive with you, you are not being productive to the entire society. Yes.
All right. Wooly, you want to give some input?
Now, I'd just like to sort of go into what Alex just said because he just said something, and yes. And you mentioned something about how the school should be providing sort of students with sort of social training, right? And I'd just like to ask if that social training would have been better picked up if it was outside of a school environment where marks and scores are important in a school system, where maybe a student should sort of try to attain these social skills. And these are very sort of human skills that can't really be assessed in the way that a school assesses their skill attainment.
In my opinion, it's not about a school teaching the children or students social skills, but it's rather students picking up social skills from interacting with other people at school, including their peers, teachers who are older than them, and perhaps underclassmen or younger. And it's this kind of way that you communicate with other people that really teaches you how you should behave around other people. If you pick it up at home, for example, you lack that type of experience of talking to other people, perhaps between the age of your parents and your age.
Now, Alex, I would argue that your point of view is somewhat subjective
It is.
because as Asian students, we have had no time to socialize outside of school, except for during Redepleted podcast. Now, in somewhere else, like maybe America, don't you think maybe more students would have the time to, hang over at hang out?
Yes, they would have had a
Someone's house
childhood. I would believe so, yes.
And we don't really do that as Asian students.
When Alex says a childhood, I think what he means is going to parties, going to, balls, all that kind of stuff.
Balls?
As a child, I don't think
As
so.
a child?
No, I'm talking about middle school and primary school.
Yeah, that's adolescence.
Well, I mean, then yeah,
No,
that's what I'm
childhood.
saying. I guess that's what I'm saying. Okay, so a social life is what he means. Yeah, Ethan, what do you think?
I guess social life is pretty important, and I guess like school is kind of like an easy way to, establish connections with people with different skills that you can probably move on with your life with, and that could potentially benefit from each other, as well as just establishing different connections, and I think that's really important. And I guess even if you move to university, going to university, it's not always about just education. It's about establishing connections, and that's really important.
Right. So what do you think? What skills so you also think that networking is the most important thing?
Yeah.
When it comes to skills that you should be acquiring at school.
Yeah.
What about you, Odo?
Well, apart from social skills, I think that language skills is another thing that we have to learn. So language, we obviously use it every day in life. So in school, we're taught Chinese and English. So that's the language we use in our daily lives. We communicate using them. So if we don't get taught on the grammar or how to speak that language, we won't be able to effectively communicate when we go to higher education or going out into society. So I think the school needs to prepare students how to communicate, and also, as you guys mentioned, social skills, how to communicate using that language. So I think these two are very crucial skills to acquire in education systems.
What do you think about literature? Should literature be a mandatory thing to learn in school?
Well, literature, I think it's quite useless because
Wow. All right.
That's a very...
That's a very.
I would doubt that.
Wooly, do you have any thoughts?
Yes,
on that?
okay. So you say that literature is useless, and I do sort of disagree with that based on a couple of reasons. The first is that literature provides... this first one is sort of vague, but it still stands a valid reason in my opinion, because literature sort of opens an avenue into viewing the past based on the context with which the literature, sort of the authors write their pieces of literature. That's the first thing. The second thing is that literature provides a good platform for students to learn complex sentences and complex sort of story ideas, which might help them in their future, especially if they're pursuing a language-related subject in university. The third thing is that literature opens up sort of an avenue of sort of communication with other people who have similar interests in the future. So for instance, if you have to communicate with somebody who has an interest in literature in the future during your work life or even during your university life, then this would benefit you deeply if you have this basic understanding of literature that schools can provide you in the limited time in which you are allocated to actually learn literature in school.
All right, we're going to pick up on that point later on. So there is I don't want to say model answer, but there is an answer to this question. According to my research, which reliable, not reliable, we don't know. The answer of what skills should be acquired from school is 5 skills. The first being emotional coping skills, independent thinking skills, accountability, self-awareness, and balance. Yep.
What? I like that a lot.
So does anyone disagree with any of the 5 things?
I disagree with balance.
All right, explain.
So, our current system, the International Baccalaureate, it has 10 Ivy learner traits. Remember them? Does anyone remember the 10 IBs for the
Give me a
traits?
moment.
No, you're not supposed to Google it.
Risk takers, inquirers,
knowledgeable.
thinkers, knowledgeable.
Your point? What's your point?
Open-minded.
Balanced, open-minded.
What's your point,
What
Timmy?
is balanced is one of them. But
Okay.
does the IB system really make it balanced?
Yes, they force us to take 2 science subjects and 1 humanity, or 2 humanities and 1 science subject.
What about the
And
core
PE.
subjects? When we talk about balance, it's not all about academics, right?
And also I think balance, like, like for example, like the CAS project, right?
Mhm.
Like you have to like balance your hours, like service or creativity. But some people might be, I guess, better at one sort of thing, and people can kind of benefit each other by collaborating. But like, I guess a person can like specialize on one thing, and I'd say that's quite balanced, like as a whole, and we can kind of, I guess, work more efficiently with each other.
All right.
I think the definition of balance has been kind of thwarted over the years, right?
It is
There are
very
some-
vague, yeah.
It's very vague because you have different people interested in different things. If you're only interested in humanities, why be forced to take a science? If you know that you're going to be interested in only humanities, why would you want to take chemistry or biology? Just because if this is what the IB system defines as balanced, is it the most effective way to make people learn this knowledge related to these subjects?
Do you think that the IB should, I don't want to say conform, but switch its ways so that you can take 3 science subjects or 3 humanities, just like the local system?
I think that there should be a choice to do that if you want to. Like if you can choose whatever you want to do. If you want to take these subjects, you get to take them. If you don't want them, just don't. Because then you will have the accountability for the future, and you'll be self-aware of the consequences.
Oh my god. All right. I like how you talk about specialization because that's kind of what we're going to talk about next. We're going to be going into future issues and technological development. So the question I would ask everyone here is that do you feel that the current way we are educating children fully prepares them for the needs of the 21st century?
So can I talk? Yeah, sure. So the first thing I'd probably doubt this, but the first sort of avenue of attack I'd attack this question with would probably be nobody is sure how the 21st century will turn out, and any sort of estimate that we put out today will not necessarily be true in the future. So even if schools are actively trying to sort of help students be prepared for the 21st century, they might be wrong. So this question is sort of difficult to answer even if they try to prepare them for the 21st century, because we just don't know how it's going to turn.
But I want to say that, for starters, school isn't even preparing us for the present. If they aren't able to prepare us for the present, how are they able to prepare us for the future? They're pretty outdated, if you ask me. Just thinking about, for example, you have a lot of different responsibilities we have when we, let's say, grow up and go into society. Basic things like taxes or insurance policies. Like once we go out, we'll have no clue how to deal with them, and it will be a pain trying to learn them when we could have learned them at school.
Well, I'd probably say that yes, I concede that the school does have sort of weaknesses in this sort of category where they don't teach you sort of life skills.
Life skills.
But I would argue that the school does sort of help you with your very present concerns, and that is because a school prepares you for your university degree, basically. Because the current educational system requires you to have these set of skills and these set of qualifications in order to attain your university degree. And the school is helping you to get these qualifications to such an extent that you can pursue your education in a university of your choosing.
So the school system is inherently flawed.
But not what the school itself is trying to teach you.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
I kind of want to raise a point. So if you look back at, I don't know, like Harvard or I forgot like what university, but
Yale.
yeah, there's
Yale.
like entry tests back in like the 1900s. It's basically like 8th grade algebra, right? So I guess like stuff like because we start to know more stuff, like the entry requirements like get higher and higher, and we have to learn more stuff in order to discover more. And that's kind of a problem because it's gonna be quite endless. Like you're gonna have to keep learning stuff, like more and more stuff, and more stuff. So like I don't think like humans can like reach a point like I think humans will reach a point where we can't really discover anything with our current like biology or like by memory, I guess.
I don't think that would
Is
be
there a limit to how much knowledge?
by far, according to our psychology teacher, there has not been a limit to the storage of brain capacity as of yet. But the question here is whether our school system is innovating enough to match how the world is evolving. So, Polo, what do you think? Is the school innovating enough to fit the requirements of the 21st century?
Well, I think for us, IB students, we get to use computers or laptops as some sort of technology-based learning. So I think that prepares us for like future, like the 21st century as a whole, because we're in a society that is more or less technology-based. So getting to use these technologies early, like during education, really helps us develop skills that would be required in maybe a workspace or life in society. So I think it is quite good that we get to use laptops as a way to learn, but there are also other stuff that we aren't learning, like how to deal with taxes. I think everyone knows that schools don't teach you how to deal with taxes, and they don't teach you how to prepare for maybe higher levels of education. So it's only targeting secondary school education for us now. So it's basically teaching you how to answer questions in exams rather than how to apply these knowledge in like maybe other aspects of life.
All right, I would argue a bit against that. So I think one of the major benefits that the IB has over the DSE system is this insane emphasis on critical thinking. So critical thinking is what IB keeps promoting, and it's quite useful. You have to question everything. TOK is the question of why we know what we know, remember? And critical thinking allows us to look at the reliability of things. We can make judgments that feel more like that feel like our own decisions and judgments a bit more. And I think that critical thinking is definitely very useful. And the fact that IB is teaching it is very good. And because we're leaving this industrial age, there were a lot of debates on, look at how the school is teaching current stuff. We've never changed the education system for hundreds of years, and we're teaching our students to be factory workers. But I think the IB is doing that a little bit better because they're giving factory workers the choice to learn critical thinking.
I feel like expanding on Timmy's point because it was quite
enough in general.
because it was quite repetitive. That I feel like what Timmy's trying to say is that the IB is acknowledges that it will not be able to, let's say, innovate as quickly as the world around us. So instead, they teach us how to innovate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's what Timmy means by critical thinking. So anyone else have anything to say about that?
And also, I guess like TOK kind of changed like my perspective on like my personal biases. Like I guess like look back at some like decisions or things I've said, and I guess it it kind of shows growth in like understanding yourself as well, which is good.
All right. Right. So
So you haven't voiced your own opinion about TOK. What are you doing? Come on, speak up.
TOK, I guess, is a very...
Let's be honest. What do you think of TOK?
Is it a waste of time?
Oh, I wouldn't say a waste of time, but I mean, it's part of. It just feels more like I don't want to say a chore, but it feels like a
burden.
Okay, let's just put it this way, right? You won't feel the effects of TOK until they actually come out. So.
But that's most of what we've learned.
Okay, so TOK encompasses a lot of areas of knowledge. So let's say psychology, art, biology, chemistry. So I think TOK is a place where we can combine those together, which is quite useful, not useful, I wouldn't know, but I guess it's part of a bigger picture that we might or might not see right now.
Yeah.
And I definitely, and some people definitely don't see it yet. So
I think most of us are actually having trouble seeing that. But
yeah,
that should be the ultimate goal.
but that should be the goal of TOK,
Yeah.
right? By combining everything to enhance your skills. So, well, that's
Yay,
basically
next
it.
segment. Let's go.
All right. So Wooly talked about how we're not innovating enough, kind of.
I think that was Alex. I rebutted his point.
Okay, fine. So, so let's bring this conversation to a bit to the psychological side, right?
Wow.
We've recently learned that teachers, parents are gatekeepers in our lives, right? They're gatekeepers.
Can you define the word gatekeepers?
So they're the ones controlling what information we would receive.
That's good. All right.
So here's the question. So what do you think is the role of a teacher? And a follow-up question, do you think a teacher should have the power to control what you learn as a whole? So should they have the power to control the curriculum? Or do you think there should be a higher power that makes the bigger decisions for them?
Which is the current system.
Yeah. So
I feel like there has to be an upper structure. Or else, if the teacher is allowed to manipulate, let's say, the syllabus all they want, you're going to end up with some students who learn a lot, some students who learn very little, some students who know a lot about a specific aspect of a subject, and some students who know a lot about a different aspect of the same subject. And if that's the case, tests become basically impossible to be standardized. I'm not saying standardized tests are a good thing,
we will get to that later.
but I'm saying that it's gonna really mess up the entire system. But I feel like teachers should be given the freedom to manipulate the syllabus that they are given to a very small extent. I think the IB gives teachers that freedom in the options. Well, they used to. Let's say coronavirus messed that up, but there used to be options where the teachers would choose 2 out of 4 options from a subject and would teach them to their students. And the students would learn those options, and that would be part of their syllabus.
Why? Why would giving the teachers the freedom to sort of change the syllabus to their heart's content reduce the sort of the overall uniformity of educational attainment of different students?
Because different teachers have different values, and different teachers put their value and emphasis on different parts, or maybe different areas of the subject.
There's also another factor to this, is the effort of the teachers. So let's say
That's an example. Let's say a biology teacher started only teaching about plants for an entire year.
yeah, let's use that example, right? So if a teacher doesn't put in effort, then if we give the teacher more control, then the whole class would be completely trashed. So there's an element of effort there.
But then even in the current system where there is an overarching sort of curriculum, such teachers as you have described them, have been able to succeed in their goal of personalizing their teaching schedules and personalizing their teaching content to such an extent where certain people might have certain comments to talk about.
So do you think there should be a higher requirement and a higher reward, let's say, in pay, of how the teacher should be assessed before they're allowed to teach?
I think generally that teachers should just have better training so that they can have a similar enough ability and similar enough teaching value. And I'm not talking about personal value, because personal value is are their own personal sort of prerogative. We're not supposed to tackle with that. But we're going to have to sort of uniformly assess their ability to teach students in a way that every other student, that no matter which teacher they get assigned to, they get a similar enough education so that they have an equal chance of attaining a high score basically at an assessment. So that's why we should maybe focus on teacher training instead of like questioning the current system itself, because as we can see, even with the current system of a sort of a top-down syllabus, teachers are still able to sort of personalize their teaching syllabus to a degree that some people might have something to talk about.
But don't you think the current system would apply some pressure on the teachers so that they would, let's say, conform a little bit to the teaching pattern of what should be the ideal way to teach?
No, it's definitely not it's possible that there is some sort of pressure, but given that right now it is a very top-down system and teachers are still able to have that leeway to do basically whatever they want, for most of the time, I don't really see that as a problem with the system itself, because it seems like no matter which system, teachers will still have to be given the freedom to sort of manipulate their own syllabus to a small extent or to a large extent in order to fit their own sort of requirements and so on.
So what you're saying is the system does not really matter, right?
And the teacher matters. The teacher must be able to be trained and to be conditioned to view their teaching to sort of to be uniform in such a way that can sort of confines to a system.
All right.
But then again, there's a problem with society because teachers don't get paid enough.
Yeah, that is true.
I'm very certain that like if teachers became more of a I'm very certain that they're not getting paid enough. Like at least like middle secondary school teachers probably don't get paid.
In the local system, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe university teachers will be paid like
a lot higher.
A lot.
Yeah.
They probably go even higher than lawyers or something. I don't know. But like I think even normal secondary school teachers should be close to a high-paying job because like this will be a point that Jay-Z makes, but education is so important, and what you're teaching the younger generation will be what forms as part of the future generations, which have to save the planet, like think of new technology, blah blah blah.
Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world by Nelson Mandela. That's the quote I skipped.
I kind of want to talk about like Timmy's point about pay. So I don't know. I guess like in economics, like you kind of know like if the supply is really high, then like the price will be, I guess, quite low. So I guess that's another thing.
There are a lot of people who apply for being teachers. It's because wait, what you're implying? I don't take it on. Forgive my ignorance. So what you're implying is if there are more teachers applying, then there'll be less pay for them, right?
Yeah, essentially. But for IB teachers, I'm pretty sure IB teachers get paid more because less people are certified by the IB.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
But then it kind of goes together with Wooly's point about how teachers should be assessed more, I guess, instead of the system. So
or trained better.
Yeah, trained better. Yeah. So if IB teachers are if they have a higher requirement, then I guess this fits in with his point.
Speaking of requirements, I want to talk about tuition. Who here takes tuition? Let's raise our hands.
Well,
no, you don't. Why'd you raise your hand?
I didn't raise my hand.
Okay, you did. So why, Daisy?
It's a hand gesture.
Beyond one helps you. Why don't you take tuition, in your opinion?
Well, I guess it's more about motivation, right? So I think when Timmy does tuition, I guess it would more so be a checkup on how he's doing instead of really learning a lot, because I feel like most of the time he studies by himself to really understand the concepts instead of already understanding the concepts after class.
That's not true.
That's my observation. Could be right.
Have you ever taken tuition in the past?
Of course I have.
How was it for you?
It's been a huge waste of time.
For real?
Yeah, back in junior forms, I took math. I took Chinese. I did not take Chinese.
So the fact is, though, is that tuition is like a supplement to your school education, right? if you're not doing well enough at school, you have to take tuition, or at least in our culture, you have to take tuition, right, to make up for what you're losing to other people at school, so you can at least be better, or as good or better than them. And in our like competitive school environment, it's really important, especially to the parents, to know that they are giving their children or their children the best opportunity possible to be better than the rest. And I guess an intrinsic issue with the education system is the fact that there is an emphasis on this competition, on this competitive aspect. And I guess that's how tuition was driven. It was made for people who wanted the extra helping hand, I guess, to try and get the leg up on the rest of the cohort.
And I guess like tuition is, I guess, really targeted. Like, and it's not like how in school you have a whole class where like the teacher can't really like focus on some students. Although some teachers actually do that, but it's usually less common. Yeah.
Right. We are way behind schedule right now and we need to move. So the next general concern that we might have is the motivation and drive to learn and study. So the question is, what do you feel the most exciting or effective learning environment would be? So the ideal environment to learn.
All right, let's just take 2 points. So right now, I would argue that our current environment, well, actually no, I would argue that our environment maybe 1 or 2 years ago was mainly driven by fear of failing. Seriously, because we really wanted to get into IB, and failing to get into IB was the most terrible punishment that one can probably face, because you have to go out of town and you can do it. But now I feel like it's a lot based on our peers. I think we're mostly reinforcing each other to study for, which is a good thing if we're not doing it wrong. But as long as we're reinforcing each other to study the right materials and not use the wrong materials in exams perhaps, then yeah, I think that's a good thing. But my last point is that shouldn't curiosity be like the main reason why we learn, right? It shouldn't be the fact that we have to reinforce each other to study. It should be because we have a natural interest in the subject, right? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I would say that curiosity wouldn't be that good of a motivation, and the reason is curiosity fluctuates. Let's just say. So let's say it's the beginning of term. You get to choose what you want to study, but then your curiosity in one subject might be more than another subject. But then after half a term, the curiosity might shift away from that subject. But then you're forced to continue with this subject because you were curious of it at the beginning of term. So therefore, making your educational decisions and subject decisions based on your curiosity is a terrible decision and a terrible basis to make any decision because it changes.
Well, I mean, it changes. You're right, it does change, but so does your subject choices. You can change, let's say in the IB, right? You can change throughout half the year and say, oh, I really don't like this subject. I really want to change it from, let's say, psychology to physics, something like that, right? So I guess that would really refute your point, I guess.
Not really, because curiosity implies that you have a lack of knowledge and you have the drive or the desire to earn that knowledge, right? So then in the IB, let's just say that you're after the pre-IB program or after the NYP program for most other people, you have a curiosity to study a subject that you don't really know a lot of, right? But then after you've actually taken that program and taken it up in your actual diploma program, and you feel that your curiosity is wrong and that you don't actually want to learn more about the subject, but since you've already sort of chosen the subject for the diploma program, you can't back out of it. So therefore, your first decision to basically pursue this particular subject based on your curiosity, because you don't really know a lot about the subject, and the only reason you're taking the subject is because you're curious to learn more, will screw you up in the long term.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the Canadian university system here, right? Because in the Canadian university system, the first year is an undergraduate, and it's a very generalized group of subjects, and you can't really specialize.
Is this university or is this like
university undergraduate?
And that's different.
Yes,
This is
I'm
secondary.
going to my point.
Okay.
So do you think it would be too late by then to start looking for what you think you're curious about, or should we start now? Because if we start now, then we might be able to really understand what, like, we would be able to find ourselves, our interests, and what we want to do. And let's say we apply to the UK, where if you can go directly to medicine, you can go directly to law, you can go directly to specialized subjects. But so if you aren't very sure, then you would go to somewhere like Canada and really figure yourself out. So do you think it's, let's say, appropriate to start now?
I would say that it's appropriate to start whenever you want, but it's just that you have to make sure that your motivation for studying won't change. My argument is against curiosity as a driving force behind education, not against like choosing early on. If you have other motivations, such as if you want a stable career, for instance, or if you want to satisfy your Asian parents, then you should actually start early, because then you would have your greatest chance of actually getting a good chance of succeeding in your chosen sort of field.
Let's go. Let me repeat my question, by the way. What do you feel the most exciting or effective learning environment would be? We went way off topic, just saying.
It's really hard to say, isn't it? Because I'm pretty happy with my current learning environment, except for the fact that we have way too much work to do. Other than that, but the fact that IB is just so much less competitive than DSE is a good thing. At the same time, it still has some competition.
Not some, quite a bit.
Where would you point that out? Because I can't pinpoint that. Like,
I mean, everyone here is just fighting for, like, you're just competing to see who gets more sevens, really. And it's quite unnerving when you think about how, I guess, everyone is competing based on a specific number and not based on, for example, how much you actually learn. How much you learn doesn't exactly correlate to how well you do in a test. I think everyone here knows that.
I like how you brought up tests, because we're going to move right on to.
Wait, no,
Can I say something?
All right, keep going.
Recently, I got my econ IA
Oh
back,
God.
and my teacher was like, "Yo, this is a great essay," but then it didn't meet the criteria. That's the thing. So, yeah, I guess like that's one thing about assessment, like about how, like Alex said, how like what you learn doesn't exactly reflect, like your grades don't exactly reflect on how much you learn.
All right. So let's go to another question here, which is a branch of motivation. Do you think standardized testing is the most effective way to judge learning?
all my friends are making time.
So what else do you have? Like, what other ways do you have to test for one's ability?
Right. So when we're in, let's say, early secondary division, we were told that some schools, like international schools, don't have assessments, right? So they would judge their students' ability mostly on how they perform usually, instead of one test.
Like participation in class.
But like,
Yeah.
that isn't doable on a large scale.
And at the end of the day, they do revert back to an examination system before they embark on years.
So do you think it's effective? Is the question.
Yeah.
So would you rather have tests or no tests? That's the
I think it is inherently problematic, but it's the best choice we've got for now.
As Asians, that is our thing, I think. Collectively, we probably agree that testing is better, unless someone disagrees. So yeah, I think testing is kind of necessary. Like, there's nothing else you can really do. In like other parts of the world, they probably agree that, based on participation, you should give grades and you should judge people based on how they act instead of how they perform in a one-off test. That's probably the opinion of the rest of the world. But in terms of our system, we definitely need to prioritize testing, because that gives us a measure, a proper quantitative measure of how we're doing in terms of knowledge.
Oh, all right. Then
That was a quick debate.
that was a very quick debate.
I mean, unless you can disagree somehow.
I'm not gonna disagree at this stage, because we are already quite far into the standardized testing, let's say, it's culture, I guess,
Yeah.
because
Fallacy of something costs.
well, there's that, but still, I think we're already like accustomed to it, so we wouldn't really see the effects of, let's say, suddenly we have no more tests, then we would feel, well, how am I going to be assessed? Are my IAs going to be like 90% of my whole grade? And then you'll start freaking out. So I guess this standardized testing is how our culture really react to.
It grounds us in reality.
It grounds us in reality, right? So let's move towards a little more controversial side of education.
Let's go for it.
It's the issue of government and education. So the question is, what role do you think the government should play in education? So how much control does the government have on what we learn as a whole? So let's say liberal studies. What should they control? Yeah.
We can even link back to literature. We can link to what kind of books we're now able to read and not able to read from years time.
So I guess like different governments have like different objectives. That's kind of one thing, and I guess like governments like sometimes like they kind of promote different things like I guess STEM or innovation, but yeah.
Why is everyone so quiet suddenly?
Treading into dangerous
Very
waters.
sensitive subject.
We are treading
Yeah.
into dangerous waters,
I
but
know.
I want to say that education as a whole, I think the government should assess what would be best for the students. Best is very subjective.
Yeah,
I know.
very sensitive.
But like, I guess it really depends on the culture. Different cultures put emphasis and value on different aspects.
I like how you bring in culture because going back to psychology once again, as Ethan says, different governments have different objectives. So collectivistic cultures would have a better, the goal of enhancing the group collectively, and the individualistic cultures would aim to, let's say, bump up the 1 or 2 people, the 1 or 2 percentile, to make sure that they are the future of humanity. So I guess you're right, but in this question, I'm more focusing on not the very, very controversial side that will probably make us disappear. I'm talking about funding and stuff in terms of government funding on education.
All right, so the government definitely has a role to play in education because the government has the ability to sort of amass a large amount of public funds to do certain things that are beneficial to society, and education is clearly one of them. Because in terms of econ, it increases the quality of labor in the long term, as well as it gets kids off the street, right? If you have a large amount of teenagers who are who basically have nothing to do and are able to sort of do nothing, then they find things to do, and that might not be that good for society, both in terms of the birth rate and of teenage pregnancies and I'm not kidding here, and of drug abuses and other such undesirable behaviors. So therefore, education has a tangible benefit to society and to the person. Therefore, the government should have the ability and the obligation to amass and sort of use public funding in such a way that it promotes education, basically.
Okay. Timmy.
Are we supposed to talk about like different classes and how different classes might not receive like the same level of education as each other?
You could
Yeah,
do
because
that.
in my opinion, this is a pretty inexpensive school.
Not really.
In IB standards, also.
But like, in terms of...
But in Hong Kong, it definitely is.
yeah.
Many schools in Hong Kong are completely funded by the government. They're either like really highly subsidized, or they are actually a government or public school, you should say. So in terms of price, it's not a particularly cheap school. So, yeah.
We can't really give the definite opinion because we're literally here in this school already. But I definitely think that people with access to, if everyone had the same level of access to education, so if everyone was educated in a very standardized way by maybe very similar teachers and teaching systems, we probably have a larger number of functioning members of society in society, which I think in general is a good thing. But it's not communism, so that's not going to happen. So, and when you have like the poverty cycle, whatever going on, so if your parents are poor and they can't let you into a prestigious school, and how often would a school go out and recruit someone with the potential to be good in their school? That's rare. Maybe that should occur more in mind.
I think starting years is also important, right? Because I'm not quite sure about like our current system, but I think like we have like a placement system. Is that correct?
Do we have a placement system?
There are places.
Yeah, there are placement systems.
So I guess like your starting years are quite important, and yeah.
Well, that brings us to our first global issue today on education inequality. So let's say the government, right? Let's say the government gets to pick and choose who gets in and who does not. So, worst case scenario, the government prioritizes its own race of citizens. So let's say, hypothetically, a more Asian-based culture or an Asian-based place prioritizes Asians before other people of color or other races, right? So, what do you think about education inequality as a whole and how it's affecting the world right now? Really?
So responding to your hypothetical scenario, then in my opinion, that would not be a good education system, not only because of its moral implications, but also on sort of long-term effects. And that's because when you're prioritizing something such as race, which does not really define the abilities of the person, you're basically stripping the society of the opportunity to get the best possible combination in your labor force. So then, even if, let's say, a member of the privileged race is less intelligent or is less suited to education, he will get into school simply because of his skin color. So therefore, this is bad both in a moral standpoint because we're sort of defining human beings as sort of into different classes, but also in the long term because we're not getting the best man or woman for the job.
Right, but we're talking about the future, right? So let's say someone prioritizes a particular race, so that race would have received higher education, and theoretically, higher education means higher pay. So would that strengthen the pay gap that's already existing in that society?
Yeah. Yes. In a hypothetical society where the only sort of source of difference in education is the differences in the race, that would definitely be true. But that would not be true in real life because other factors may also play a role, such as even if a single race is seen as superior, there are still hierarchies within that race. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, some might be forced to go into sort of lower level secretarial jobs while others are put into more leadership positions. And the pay might be very different there because, as you said, this is probably not a very democratic society, and people at the top might be lining their pockets a bit more than the people at the bottom. So therefore, this would also lead to income inequality.
Any thoughts, anyone else?
What about like separating by nationality?
National. Give me an example.
So like, there's some schools in like Europe where it's like if you have like a certain passport, you can get in. Yeah, like you can get in. You have more. Like we have priority.
American International School.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, in terms of universities, I think they prioritize the citizens outside of their location, right? Do they?
I think it's an 80 to 20%.
So
local to international, 80 to 20.
Is that most universities?
No. Some universities try to bump up their international rankings by sort of increasing the amount of foreign students and telling how sort of international they are. while other universities might actively try to inhibit foreign students from coming into their universities because of certain government pressure. So, for instance, the subject of medicine in the UK has a strict foreigners limit because of reasons that the UK government has put in place. So, therefore, it's really difficult to actually get into the educational sort of field in the UK if you're a foreigner.
But one thing's for sure is that a vast majority of universities' revenue does come from international students. You can just see on any university, they have, like, for example, a local prize and an international student prize, and you can tell they're like 3 or 4 times apart, like in terms of the price range, and it's quite, I wouldn't say unfair, but it is not very equal. Probably they want to benefit local students because definitely, local students as well, they don't have to pay for other services like, for example, housing or perhaps food or stuff like that. But at the same time, I doubt it would be 3 to 4 times the price range difference.
I'd actually like to respond to that. So first of all, local students would, for most part, still have to pay for their own sort of living in because they might not be from the university town or from the university sort of city. Then they might have to move and they might have to eat. And even if they are from the university town or city, their parents will still probably have to pay for them. And in terms of the fee difference, yes, it's fairly unfair, fairly unequal, but there is sort of a semi-good reason for that. And that is because if you are a local student, that means your parents have been paying taxes for the government, which then subsidizes the university for a better part of 18 years if you're actually going to university as an undergraduate. And as a local student, you have a greater chance of actually staying back in the society in which the university is situated in and actually benefit the society long term by improving the labor quality instead of taking that university education and going back to another place and perhaps in their home country or other nations and benefit those societies. So therefore, there is a significant sort of benefit if you sort of increase sort of your local student intake by these sort of tricks, I guess, but actually it's very unfair to the international students.
Let's backtrack a bit. Another global issue is how much the educational dropout rate, because not in Hong Kong, right? But in here, it's very, very common that everyone goes to school because a huge part of school is paid by the government. It's free. So, but in places like America, it's very common for people to drop out of school for various reasons that we would not name. But what do you think do you think that would be a problem, like the high dropout rate in a certain country or something like that? Timmy?
It kind of depends on what you're dropping out for. Like, some people like drop out for esports and they actually earn money. Like, that's, I guess, okay.
Did you just say esports?
Yeah.
Don't forget to check out our last podcast on video games.
Oh my god.
I guess you have to, have a career. But, you don't actually have to, if you're super rich right now.
Right. Well, this comes now. We're going to go to our closing question, which is quite a general question, to be honest. Look towards the future, right? What would the future of education look like? What do you think the future of education should look like?
I think the future of education should probably look something that teaches the students on a more personal level and sort of helps them to develop as an individual instead of assigning them sort of a number or trying to force them to fit inside a mold that sort of is more collective mold that works on a collective scale but not on an individual scale. So this might manifest in sort of more individual teaching time, the higher sort of teacher-students ratio, and other things that helps the student develop personally.
One moment. Let someone else speak.
I think that for the future of education, I agree that there will be probably more individual teaching styles. So maybe some students will have more teaching hours so that they can learn, because everyone has different degrees of how fast they learn. I think that's a good thing. But in terms of technology, I feel like the supply for teachers is only decreasing because there are less people who want to be teachers when you have the internet that's just getting more and more powerful. You have like Khan Academy. Those are probably even better than some of the current teachers. No offense, but yeah, I think that it will be a lot more mechanical, and that would actually, it would probably be good, but at the same time detrimental, because in different ways. So it'll be good in the fact that some students will be able to learn more in what they enjoy, but it'll be detrimental in terms of how similar are people going to be, as in like how many applications can you think of for the knowledge you'll have, because they're only going to be learning from let's say I just keep having the image of learning from a robot, like just listening to instructions from robots.
So do you think it's going to move towards online learning? Because you bring up Khan Academy, you bring up a lot of
I think so. I think COVID was like kind of like the step forward. It was just like a large barricade for a lot of people, because this barricade was literally the only way you could cross it is by getting a computer or an electronic device, a screen you can look at. And that forced a lot of people to transition. I'd say. I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, I mean that your future of education seems a little
fictional and science fictional.
Because look, going back to our global issue of education inequality, we're talking about people who can't afford computers, right? Then what would they do? They would not receive education, so they would hypothetically get poorer and poorer without education, and then they would
that would probably
stretch the pay gap.
That would probably happen.
So you're saying the pay gap would get worse because of the future of the education system.
I would say.
So that's your closing thought.
In terms of society, education is probably getting worse. That's my thought.
All right. Although,
personally, I think that education will be more technology based, as Timmy said. Yes, I do agree that the poorer you get, the less education you get. But still, I think governments will have a lot more programs, as in like learning centers, like for those who can't afford an electronic device to go in there and learn, like based on videos. Like there are a lot of resources online that they can learn from. So if some volunteer teachers who want to teach those children, they can like record videos, put them and send them to the government so that those poor people can learn, and maybe they can take like some standardized tests and get a job to improve the money gap, as you said, the pay gap. So I think there's some good upsides and downsides, but still it's a way forward for the poor to learn, and I think the entire education system is going to help those in need.
so you think the government is going to bounce back and help this group of people? Is what
Well,
you're
in
saying.
Hong Kong, it's a 15-year mandatory education for everyone. So it doesn't matter if you're poor or rich, you still get 15 years of it.
Well, globally, do you think?
Oh, globally, well, of course, the government has the right to teach their youngsters or juveniles.
Not just right, responsibility.
What?
Responsibility instead of right. Yeah, they have the responsibility.
Responsibility,
Yeah.
yes. So I think they would implement these education to their students accordingly. So that's the future of education, I guess.
So you still think the government will bounce back and help them?
It's all going to depend on whether the government is competent or.
That's very different from what Timmy said.
A kind of a different view in education,
Okay.
I suppose. I'm not going to think about where it's likely to go, but where I hope it will go.
That's not the question.
Oh, is it where I think it will go?
What would it look like?
What would it look like, right? I would hope that it would look like based on what we are now and what's doable, I hope like education will be more hands-on. Currently, we're all just sitting in classrooms looking at a screen or looking at the teacher or listening to the teacher and copying our own notes and stuff. But that's not really the most efficient way to learn. I guess as a little bit of an anecdote, my kindergarten education was very, very hands-on. Like, for example, in the classroom there would be a map just lying on the table, and then you could go to the map, ask the teacher, hey, what's that? And then the teacher would tell you. We made maps, cut out paper, like traced countries onto a piece of paper, cut them out, and made our own rolled maps. And this kind of hands-on type of way of teaching is really effective, not only in capturing the attention of a child. It also gives them first-hand experience and imprints the information in their brain. It's so effective that I don't know. I guess I don't know why the rest of the world isn't doing it, but it's probably because it requires so much more capital, a greater teacher-to-student ratio, and so on. And yeah, I hope that's where education.
So you just refuted your own point.
What?
You just said that this is not viable.
No, I didn't say it was not viable. I said that's probably why the rest of the world isn't doing it right now.
No, I'm not trying to tear your point apart.
Yes.
I would argue that your current geography knowledge is great. You don't
Yes.
even take geography, and you can name like 100 countries at least, maybe. Yeah, and I would argue that maybe in our neighborhood or whatever, we probably all had the chance to cut out our own maps. But everyone's different. I remember nothing from cutting out maps. I don't even remember
No, because I took my kindergarten education in the U.S. at a school, and it's a
What?
It's
That doesn't make any
no, it's a
sense.
special institution called Montessori. I think you guys might have heard of it, but it is renowned for its special teaching in teaching children.
Then yours must be very different from the local U.S. education system.
It is.
Because I've asked a lot of people from the U.S. and they can't even name where their own country is on the world map.
It's very different.
Yeah, so it's probably a huge exception. Ethan, what do you think the future of education will look like?
What I think it will be, what I hope it is actually quite different from how I think it will be. So, I think that online courses like Others will be more accessible, and I don't know if you guys seen a lot of ads, like monthly ads. Have you guys seen those?
Sorry, what?
Monthly, Skillshare.
yeah.
So I guess if we have some specialists make those courses and actually have tests, for example, the AP test, which could be done online, I think it's easier to, follow what you're curious about and work towards that. Say, I'm sitting here on a Saturday and Sunday, and I got some time. I can start learning stuff on my own and just get some kind of qualification. Yeah.
I feel like that would be very problematic because let's say your hypothetical situation, I have a free Saturday and Sunday, and that's very hypothetical. So let's say I'm sitting here free for 2 days. What would I be doing? I would be playing video games. I would be doing things that aren't really contributing to my learning, let's say.
Sounds like a huge problem.
I think we have to work on the core, but then those other courses can be ways for you to expand your knowledge really easy.
So what you're saying is, in addition to what we have now, we would have those as well to really increase our areas of knowledge.
Yeah. So I guess instead of having to pay so much for university, you can pay for a specific course and learn it by yourself, either for fun or as a qualification.
Right. Oli?
As long as I think the future of education will probably be more centered around the use of electronic devices, because aside from the high cost per machine currently, it's actually a very cheap system because you're basically allowing one single teacher to teach way more students than he or she would have been able to if she was to teach them physically. So this would, in the future, when these machines are a bit cheaper and a bit more widely available, this would basically help governments to increase their education, the educational level of their sort of their people, their population, just in terms of the sheer numbers, I guess. Where in the past, where you have to have physical sort of schools, then perhaps 1 million children per year could be educated. But then in a larger country where these things are suddenly becoming more cheaper, then perhaps the same amount of teachers, because they can record their lessons and not be sort of restricted by physical sort of constraints, then they would be able to educate 2 million people, 2 million children per year. And this would sort of help the government or the educational bureaus say that they have a greater level of educational attainment, and therefore they would continue to pursue this and basically expand on internet education as a whole, because it basically can benefit more children in the long term.
Well, my closing thoughts are that there's no denying that the electronics will definitely play a role in the future of education, because we're already doing it. And going back on Timmy's point about how COVID was a stepping stone to how we are actually becoming more digital in terms of education, I believe that it's not necessarily a good thing that happened, but
It's not a good thing.
yeah. But I can't say Timmy is wrong. That's how I'm gonna put it. So
That's a first, right? That's it.
yeah, that is a first. Yeah. So I actually do agree with Timmy for once that that this will actually move towards a more digital way of learning. So, well, that concludes our closing thoughts.
I'm so glad we didn't make any school shitting jokes.
Oh no, Timmy.
I'm gonna do a Lapis Striker outro. Okay?
Ah.
Alright guys, remember to smash like and subscribe, and make sure to stay tuned for our next podcast on what's our next podcast?
Gender identity.
Are we doing
No, we are not. No.
Are we doing gender identity?
We'll let you guys know.
Stay tuned to find out. That concludes our Lapis Striker outro, and everyone is dismissed.
Oh my god.
Oh.